The Senior Rehab podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. If you need high-quality geriatric con ed that's worth your time and money, check out Great. Owned by the living legend Carol Lewis, Great offers courses and products created by recognized leaders in geriatrics. Learn the most effective techniques for diagnosing and treating your patients. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/great and get $25 off by using the code SRP25. Hit me.
This is a Senior Rehab podcast, the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults. And now your host, my grandson, Dusty Jones.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Thank you for your time today. Today's guest is Richard Severin. Excuse me. He is a board-certified cardiovascular and pulmonary clinical specialist. He graduated from the University of Miami with his Doctor of Physical Therapy degree in 2013, followed by a cardiopulmonary residency at the William S. Middleton VA Medical Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he did an orthopedic residency at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's working on a PhD in rehabilitation science at UIC with a focus on cardiorespiratory physiology and obesity. Dr. Severin also serves as adjunct professor for the Doctor of Physical Therapy programs at UIC and South College. You can find him on Twitter at PT Reviewer and now on the Senior Rehab Podcast. Richard, good morning.
Hey, Dustin, thanks for having me on here, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to chat. I was going to say you have the best beard in rehab, but you have been dethroned from that position, and I want to tell you why.
All right, let's hear it.
Because you have changed divisions. You're no longer in the beard division. You are in the lion's mane division, because I cannot tell where your beard ends and your hair up top begins. So...
Was that motivated by you or by Will Butler? Because that's a recent development. It's a recent development.
That's all Will Butler. I saw that and it's like that's so true. So I am gonna crown you with the best lion's mane in physical therapy.
You know, it's I was running a little bit of joke, but between him and a few other people that it kind of makes sense, you know, for the King of Hearts, hashtag King of Hearts, who was King Richard of England, the lion-hearted, and I'm a Nittany lion. I like hearts.
Oh
it all makes sense. The prophecy is becoming complete. I guess.
I love it. You put a lot of thought into that. That's great. I'm gonna have to make a good graphic for this episode.
Oh boy,
involving a little Lion King, probably. So
I love that movie too. I love that movie.
Yeah. So yeah, man, we got to chat at CSM and just hear what you're up to. I know I first met you at last year's CSM when you were presenting with the great Matt Lee. He's a legend in these parts in Central Kentucky. But you are well known for your stance on vital signs, and we're going to talk a lot about that today and some other stuff. But I want to start off with how this topic really hits home for you. Could you share just kind of the recent events?
Yeah, so I mean, this all really started. We kind of go back to even the PT school when I was at Miami, and some of the mentors I had, and Merrill Cohen, who's now a Worthingham Fellow at the APTA, and Larry Cahalan. I had a great background there, and just my experience of seeing patients, you know, and just reading the literature, a lot of the patients we've seen outpatient practice, and Matt can probably attest to this, and Kyle, who was our other speaker, and really all of our listeners, or really any PT, that we see, you know, older populations, and data backs it up. Individuals over 46 tend to be the ones who receive physical therapy services the most in the United States. Most of them are inactive. Most of them are overweight. A lot of them may have diabetes, may have a smoking history. And we know this because if you look at the risk factors and the past medical history of patients with low back pain, patients with knee osteoarthritis, patients with hip osteoarthritis, and various tendinopathies, like it's the same risk factors present in those populations as are the risk factors for heart disease, the same exact ones, especially physical inactivity. So when you think about it, we're seeing the same population. Now, there was a great paper that came out in 2002 by Ethel Fries who highlighted this, but she focused more on CIs within their program. It was a great study, and it really gave us some key insight. And then Severin did some similar stuff, more home health. I wanted to really try to answer the question, what is going on nationally? Because I want to get a broader scope. So we used this survey. We polled 16,000 therapists, and we got a pretty good response rate for a cold survey and a completion rate. We ended up getting about 15% completion rate, and we got about I think we got like 2,500 surveys completed, something
Wow.
incredible. It's the largest database of this to date. To really answer this question, because I feel that if, just my experience with PTs aren't doing it, aren't taking blood pressures based on the Ethel's data, based on the data that we've collected. And it can be a problem. If we really want to move into being direct access providers, we got to screen for the things that are like the most pressing. And hypertension is not something you can see. Like, you can see a fracture, you can interrogate questions about maybe a malignancy, but for hypertension, I've had cases of patients. I remember I'll never forget when I was a student, I had a patient with a blood pressure of 240 over 140. And what do you think some of the symptoms were, Dustin? What do you think?
A headache, a splitting migraine.
Had absolutely none.
Wow,
absolutely none.
Incredible.
And when I found out it was an issue with him with like medications, like he couldn't get access to it, and that kind of pulls in with what we know nationally. I mean, even there's gaps in awareness, there's gaps in treatment, and then there's gaps in control. 50% of individuals who get through get to being aware, get to being receiving treatment, only 50% of them are, based on national epidemiological data, are effectively controlled. So that, to me, that's too much of a coin flip for me. Just it is a coin flip to really kind of go off of just in the chart. Maybe they're on meds. You got to take it yourself, and no other provider, on the initial evaluation, does not take blood pressure and heart rate, like not even for like just regular checkups. And we're going to have people move around, sometimes vigorously. And I remember talking to other providers and other friends and colleagues in the professions and mentioning this issue. Like my friends at cardiac rehab, my friends who are exercise physiologists, and they're like, "This is crazy that you even have to have this discussion." And I agree. I agree. But there were some personal developments to this too. If we want to talk about that,
definitely, I would love to hear kind of the why. Because a lot of people may be like, okay, vitals, whatever, like I'll take them. But this obviously is a passion of yours and seems to hit home pretty close. So definitely share that story.
Yeah, so I don't know, maybe unknown to a lot of people. Heart disease kind of runs in my family. My grandfather died young. He died in his 50s, a great man, from a heart attack. And he grew up in an era where, cigarette smoking and, alcohol consumption and were a little bit, our views towards those were a little bit different. He had been sober for a while and had no real issues for about 20 years. But he died of a heart attack, and when they did the analysis afterwards, they found that he probably had multiple smaller heart attacks that went undetected and untreated.
Wow.
So again, just the idea of trying to get early detection, involved, and then most recently, my mother, and anything that when it hits family, it's always something. It's a little bit more pressing. And people have shared cases now that we start using the Vitals or Vitals movement and the hashtag with that. But we have all kinds of great stories. But my mom is a good story. It's a good story. So my mom had a concussion. She works in autistic support at a school. She's more moving towards like the end of her career now. She's been a teacher for decades. But she got a concussion, and she went to see a physical therapist, which is great, to kind of get her back, some of her balance stuff back. She had, the work with stuff with that. And the PT just kind of, I guess she would, I think she might have actually heard some of my like stuff or Kyle's stuff or other people's stuff, because she decided to take a blood pressure, because my mom was demonstrating some signs that were a little odd. But either way, she made a decision to do it.
Yeah. And this is outpatient.
This is outpatient. Outpatient. I won't give the name of the facility to put anyone on
you can publicize it.
Yeah. I've been telling my mom I wanted to meet her because I'm like, I wanted to thank her for what she did, and we'll talk about what she did in a second. But she grabbed the blood pressure, which was fine. My mom's got great blood pressure, but she grabbed the heart rate, and she did it manually, which is good. And she noticed that every so often, my mom was skipping a beat. And she did it again for a full minute. And she's like, hey, everything else checks out for the most part, but I'm a little concerned about your heart rate. So they sent my mom to back to her primary evaluated her, sent her to a cardiologist. Turns out, I believe, she never disclosed to me what the arrhythmia is. Typical. Italian,
don't worry about it, son.
Yeah, they'll never tell you. My mom's been like that for just this kind of positive stoicism. Like she's just, she'll put up with so much, and never let it like get to her kids, which I always value.
Yeah.
You put on a happy face no matter kind of what you're dealing with, but. We could talk about that as well. I mean, that's an important, I think, trait for PTs. You kind of put the stuff beside you and kind of get what you need to get done. But anyway, so she, they found something that was positive. It was affecting her ejection fraction too. They put her in a atenolol, and she's been fine since. But it all goes back to that PT making that decision to do the right thing, to take a blood pressure, to take a heart rate. And whether it was motivated by my actions or not, until this is the standard, people ask, well, when are you going to stop doing this? Why do you keep doing this? There's probably thousands of cases like that. And until that's the norm, then I'm not going to stop this kind of thing because, God forbid, someone didn't check. My mom went into an event, and then that would be a different story we'd be talking about right now.
Yeah.
So, it just, again, like there's a need for it, and again, if we want to be direct access providers, we've really got to start being a little bit more serious about this.
Yeah. And I really admire, that PT. I hope they listen to this at some point, but the fact that they detected it is one thing, but then the fact that they did something about it, that they, took the time out of their busy day to call, the primary care physician or to refer your mom back. I think for me, that's where I get caught up, a lot in my patients in home health. In that, I mean, I don't know what normal vital signs are anymore, honestly, just with the patient population. But then, when you do detect something, when you throw on all the other things of the day and all the other issues and the productivity, just all the pressures of our job, it's very easy to be like, oh, well, that's okay. Their primary care doctor probably, has that under control. I'll check the med list or something. And I'm not bragging about this. I'm just thinking about those instances where I've heard something that I thought, that's interesting. But then kind of brushed it under the rug, and how I shouldn't do that. I should take the time, to communicate with other providers and act on it and not just acknowledge it, I guess.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And the impetus or the analogies I usually give to PTs, if a patient came to your clinic and you suspected a fracture, would you call the primary? Yeah, you'd call the primary. It's a bit different scenario, but something that needs medical attention, you refer to the provider. Yeah. If you suspected a patient with cancer, so it's using your interrogated questions, because there really is no physical exam we can do to rule in cancer with really any certainty. We'd still make that call. And yet, blood pressure is something we can do fairly objectively, and relay that data. Now, there's going to be variability throughout, the day. There's going to be variability depending on a lot of things, but at least opens that conversation. Because no one's going to get diagnosed with hypertension or any arrhythmia based off one physical examination. For an arrhythmia, you need to have an ECG. You can detect irregularities that aren't known to the medical team, and then they can make that decision. Yeah. And we can get a couple blood pressure measurements, but then if they're concerned, then they'll do an ambulatory measurement to see what they are throughout the day, to really kind of get an idea. So there's it's just we would do this in other scenarios, and why people view cardiovascular disease, they don't view it in the same light. To me, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I do get it to some degree now, from our research and from practicing. And I think what you mentioned about not knowing what to do with the values to a certain degree, and I think that's part of it. And I've likened this to that. Is it what's it? The Schrodinger's cat or Schrodinger's box, right? If you,
I'm not familiar.
Well, I think the analogy works is, if if there's a scenario that you have a box, right? It's mysterious in a certain sense. Who knows what's in there? And if you are uncertain about what's in there, you have a couple options. The option to open it and then deal with the chaos that may ensue, which you may not be certain how to manage, or to leave it alone, to completely ignore it. And I think that's what happens to a degree.
Got it.
People don't know what to do if they catch something, so they avoid doing it at all.
Yeah.
Which is not great.
Yeah. And I think another thing too that I'm starting to see is our perception of what is dangerous or an actual problem can be very different from a physician's perspective.
True.
In the sense of, in school, I definitely, followed, the abnormal vital signs by the books. Let's say I have a patient that, is running 160 over 94, 96. I'm pretty worried. I'm not going to do much with this person. I'm very cautious. And at first, I would call. Well, I'm always going to call the primary care physician. But the pattern that I've seen is, do they have symptoms? No. And then the physician says, "Oh, they're good." And then they continue on with therapy. And then I talked to my wife. She works in the emergency room, so she sees this stuff all the time where patients will get sent in, with a 160s to 170s over, 90s to up to 100, and they're asymptomatic and they run that pressure consistently, and they're on, these meds and they just run that pressure a lot. and she's like, okay, there's not much, else we can do for them. And so it's interesting to see the physician perspective, especially with a lot of the patients that we're going to be working with in terms of the listenership, that their normal is abnormal in our eyes. And that's just been an interesting thing to observe. What's your take on that?
Yeah. So what we're actively trying to develop, there's a few of us within the section, some outside of it, on developing guidelines. And I would agree that, up into about 160 systolic and maybe about 100 diastolic, you're probably fine to do most things in rehab. I'd probably avoid resistance training, especially upper extremity resistance training. Yeah. You're probably fine to work with a patient. You just, if it's caught and not in the primary is not aware, that's the biggest thing. Is that awareness is still a really big problem in this country. People being aware of their and home health specifically. Sarah Arena has published quite a bit on this, that they'll catch pre-hypertension to hypertension that in a quarter of patients will know that they had these values. So there's some data on that. I think having a guideline the kind of, because you're right, you don't want to be calling and sending people to the emergency room for unnecessary reasons.
Yeah.
And then I think as well, up into about 180 over 110, which is the cutoff for hypertensive crisis.
Yeah.
You can still complete your exam. You could probably send them home. If they're not demonstrating any organ signs or any really adverse signs. But after that point, of course, you probably just enter your ED consult. But you're right. Say for 180 over 110, there's really no need to send them to an ED. But if the patient's not aware, and if the primary is not aware, that 170 over 80 can turn into an ED visit pretty soon.
Right. Yeah.
So, and there's data to support that. Especially in like the biggest concern we have, people think about high blood pressure in older individuals, and though the prevalence goes up with age, there's some other factors that tie into that. But there's still a significant portion of 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds that have hypertension. And the data suggests that, if the longer you have sustained pressures, your risk for a disorder you guys see often in home health and geriatrics, heart failure, goes up.
Right.
So, which is the end sequelae of heart disease. And if we could catch that earlier on, we could probably, prevent and at least reduce the prevalence of a lot of heart failure and complicated heart disease in older individuals. So early detection is really the key here. And then you look at even in pediatrics, there's certain conditions that if any kid especially below 18 demonstrates hypertension who's otherwise healthy, that's some pretty big red flags for coarctation of the aorta or a kidney disorder. So there are situations that are, though they're rare in kids, it's still pressing, and you can't discern that from a subjective question. You can't ask the patient, what's your blood pressure? You got to do it yourself.
Yeah. That's a good point. And two, I think along with this conversation, when I think about, you mentioned that we, we're setting ourselves up as primary care providers, for the musculoskeletal system and, basically all the other systems as well. Yeah. And I think I'm speaking to myself, but probably a lot of people listening, just because the physician is not worried about the blood pressure, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't use our own, clinical reasoning and be concerned about something. Cause that's been a situation that I've come across a lot, to where, it is, what we would consider hypertension, and the physician's like, oh, they're okay, continue on with rehab. But I should not let my guard down just because, the doctor gives a thumbs up, for sure. So, and I appreciate you just kind of laying out the numbers and specifics of what we can or cannot do, and when we should be worried, because that is helpful. Because I think those numbers get lost on a lot of people. Yeah,
when we developed that for our course that we've made with the APTA, and again, like the strategy I'm taking with this is, it's multi-tiered. We're trying to identify the problem with the survey we did, and we found some explanations which we'll be publishing soon for why this lack of blood pressure measurement or routine blood pressure measurement, why it's not so great. So we've identified the problem. We've asked the question, identified some of the problems, also identified some of the facilitators of good, vitals assessment, regular vitals assessment. And now we have a tool which we can distribute to, APTA members, or really anyone can purchase the course to learn about it. And then we're also working now on a very large multi-centered database registry to capture. And this is one of the big issues we've faced is even when we do these or we read the research and cite things, a lot of it we're relying on fairly older studies that are localized to one center. And not a lot of them are large urban centers. We're relying on data from cardiology or from different areas of medicine, which is good. I mean, those are great, huge, like very well powered studies. But we need to make PT specific stuff to really get an understanding of what we're actually seeing as far as hypertension and cardiovascular disease in our patients. So we're working on that, on basically making just a long-term cohort study to capture blood pressure data for PT practice ad infinitum. Like we've already like trained people to start like doing it. So that's something that may be coming out in the next few years, which I'm excited for. Again, so it's a multi-tiered approach, and now we have the social media push with Vitals Are Vital, and and the CVP, this cardiopulmonary section is pushing stuff. So hopefully in the next few years, a lot of these problems will be solved. But until that happens, we'll keep fighting.
keep getting after it. Yeah, and for listeners, the link to that course that Rich mentioned, the why, what, and how of cardiovascular risk stratification for the PT. I'm going to link that in the show notes. I wanted to ask you some listener questions. So Troy Mead, he's in the Senior Rehab Project Facebook group. He says, vital signs are an essential part of a complete systems review, as well as creating a holistic picture of the patient.
Absolutely.
Which specific vital signs are essentials for your typical patient, and do you yourself adapt them for patients with specific diagnoses?
So that's a great question, and it's something we teach our students here at UIC and at South College. Is that it's the holistic patient.
Mm-hmm.
You should always at least take, in my opinion, resting blood pressure and resting heart rate. I mean, you can throw on respiratory rate and pulse oximetry. Particularly if patients have pulmonary disorders, I don't think they're necessarily necessary. Without using those words twice, I guess, in a row. But and then the other classic one is temperature. I don't think temperature is as relevant to a PT. I would include it if they demonstrate other signs and symptoms of, maybe a flu or some kind of, infection. But blood pressure and heart rate, if you're gonna be pressed for time to do anything, make sure you get those, because those will change with what you do with them in rehabilitation. Now, as the other point Troy brings up about, what about patients, or how do you adapt to different patients? That's a great point, because there's some cases, especially if you're like in the acute care setting, where their blood pressures are elevated, and it might be for a reason. So it speaks to that point of communication and having everyone kind of aware and on the same page, because there are some cases where they want the pressures within a certain range. So it's just knowing the patient. Yeah. And knowing the other providers and the plan of care holistically for the patient.
Yeah. And I think about when I think about kind of that holistic picture, just understanding the person, their conditions, but then their medications as well, and how those things are going to affect those vitals, and especially I just think about when I'm tracking heart rate and heart rate response to activity, and 80% of my patients are on a beta blocker, basically. And just to recognize how that can impact heart rate as well, which
you can use RPE in that example, though. RPE.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kathy Shirley, she is a professor at Texas Women's University. She says, let him know I'm seeing a change in outpatient clinics and our students recognizing the need to evaluate and monitor vitals in that setting. I know how hard he has worked to make that change.
Oh,
there you go.
That warms my heart. No pun intended. So no, that's awesome.
What to explain to people, I guess why do you think how do you think you've impacted our profession and definitely the students with this message in terms of the tactics?
Hopefully for the good, and I'm not pulling a Socrates here and corrupting the youth of PT, but no, I think and now I'm more in academia and more in education and teaching students, so I have a direct opportunity to really get to students. Throughout the year, I'll teach, about 150 students between South and the UIC. So that's every year. And then those students go out to their clinicals and, they communicate with other students. And then what we've done through social media, and I've been very fortunate that this message has been received well by students in the student group and other PTs. And a lot of them were just, kind of unsure about what to do. And I'm always willing to talk about this stuff. Like, as you probably have guessed, and most people are aware, I have a big passion for this. And then it's been picked up and well received by people who are pretty influential in the PT profession. And Ben Fung, Kyle Ridgway, of course.
He's not influential.
Yeah.
Kyle's
yeah. Neither is his beard.
I hope he hears that.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope he hears that. No, I'm kidding. I love you, Kyle.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have Jared Hall now, and a lot of people have really kind of caught on to this, and it's made the Vitals Are Vital movement, if you want to call it that, a thing. Like, it's a tangible thing. You have a T-shirt,
Yeah. Oh, it's legit when you get a T-shirt, man.
It's legit when you get a T-shirt, and which is great because it all went right to the section to help efforts to address this kind of stuff. So which is great. The section could really use that. So it's been good to see, and people tagging me on posts and tagging other people on posts. Again, it's I think we've leveraged social media to our advantage to do it. The big concern that I do have still, and this is true probably with anything that a student learns in school, is when they go on a clinical affiliation, and then they, what students may learn things pretty thoroughly in their program, but when they get on the clinical affiliations, they tend to reflect their CIs more than their professors in many regards. And that's still the area where this needs to improve.
Yeah.
So, to my motivation and recommendation to students to keep mindful of the stuff. Like, don't abandon it and speak up, about it. Like, talk to your CIs. Like, of course, be respectful and stuff, but we really need everyone buying into this.
Yeah.
And it's great to hear, though, because I would agree that it is just interesting over the past 2 years on posts and comments and stuff about, people catching blood pressures and stuff and what they've been able to do. There's more and more of them. And I think people are starting to get it. Like, that we need to start doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I've been really, really impressed as well because, I think about this in kind of my world with wanting to change perceptions of older adults and, how PTs view their older patients and how we work with them, is that, a topic that is commonly not exciting or sexy, you've been able to generate some interest around it. Like, you've made vitals sexy, Rich, that's kind of cool. And
that is kind of cool.
Yeah. And so, like, I think about how, like, what could I learn from what you've done, and what can all the listeners learn in terms of how can we create some excitement and I guess sexiness, if you will, for lack of a better term, around a topic that is generally viewed as bland or uninteresting. And I think, you've done a great job with that. So kudos to you, man, and the many other people that have been helping in that endeavor.
Yeah, and I think what we've been successful with, and this is how we approach it with the course the cardiopulm course I teach at UIC and at South, and and I've taken this from Merrill Cohen, one of my early mentors, and Larry Cahalan, Stacy Brixton, and Jim Carlson were my mentors up in Wisconsin. But for many years, cardiopulmonary in general was taught in silos, where it was like, you're going to manage how to manage patients with heart failure, how to manage patients with COPD, and just kind of that. And, though I would love, for all of my students to become cardiopulmonary specialists, that would be awesome. There's realities of the world, right? Like, most PT students, even myself, when I came into PT school, I had no intention of doing what I'm doing now. I was going to practice orthopedics and sports and like live on South Beach. Like, that was my plan going to Miami. It was not to leave Miami.
Yeah.
But of course, your interests change, so it's always good to kind of keep an open mind. But I realize these things. Most of us go into like orthopedics or areas other than cardiopulmonary. But as we just talked about, in the beginning, and I've talked about before, like this stuff is important in just about every domain. So it's kind of what you do when you see a patient. You find their interest, and then you build this narrative together, to achieve a goal. And our goal for cardiopulmonary is to make people aware of these systems and why it's important. So we're presenting information in my course on how to do this risk screening in orthopedics, considerations for pulmonary concerns and cardiovascular concerns and neurological populations, our other most popular area of practice, pediatric considerations, geriatric considerations, athletic considerations. We bring in dietitians, nutritionists. So it's integrating these things, as a system-based approach into other settings versus just a system and a setting combined, in one silo. It's integrating this. And we still cover heart failure pretty thoroughly and all the other conditions specific to that domain, but we integrate it into other areas of practice to demonstrate its relevance, because it is relevant,
right,
to students and PTs, for the Con Ed course, on why this is relevant in their setting, in other settings. So I think that's just my view of education in general. That especially for clinical education and what we do, you gotta integrate it.
I know a lot of listeners are saying the same thing about geriatrics as well. So you're probably getting a lot of fist pumps right now when you mention the word integration.
Yeah, man.
Throughout. So I want to be respectful of your time. We'll wrap things up with some quick questions. Your responses don't have to be quick by any means.
No worries.
What are you excited about in rehab right now?
What am I excited about?
What gets your blood pumping?
Man, a lot. Well, I'm excited now that the outcomes registry by APTA, like that's kicking off. I know that's been something that a lot of people have been working very hard to develop. So we can start really tracking numbers and getting hard data to support what we do in Washington. That's going to be huge. I'm my blood's pumping because I'm a little bit nervous, a little bit excited for what's the direct access fight that's going down in Texas. It's a big one. It's a big state. Mike Connors, big kudos to that guy. He's a great leader. You got Alan Beslick, you got Mark Milligan down there working really hard. And, I think we need, and I've talked about this before in other areas, that we really need to start as a PT family, if you will, really start having the back, or having the backs of the people in other states fighting for things that we're trying to fight for nationally.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because what happens in Texas affects me here in Illinois, what affects people in California, and I think if more people are aware of what our state PACs fight every year, I think people would be more impetus to be involved in the APTA and speak up, or at least speak up at the state legislature meetings or contact their congressman or reach out to the PAC saying, hey, how can we help? Because if one member of the family wins, everyone wins. And if one member of the family suffers or loses, every member of the family suffers and loses. So, that's something that, I'm passionate about. Yeah. And then seeing like the evolution of students, man, like, and their, ability to leverage social media and leverage technology to share information, to share the good news of PT. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then there's those organizations with PT Day of Service with Josh D'Angelo and Afosa and Keaton. I'm on there. A lot of great people are on there. That's growing. So I think, this new generation of PTs, which I am a member of, they've really hit the ground running, hair on fire kind of approach of really getting out there and sharing the good news. And a lot of it's been done very well.
Yeah.
Good data to support it, good messages. Right. And that's what we need. Because, Greg Todd at our talk brought up a good point. A lot of people still don't know what PTs are. Yeah. And that's an opportunity, though. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity to shape our view. Mm-hmm. If there isn't a view established, it's an opportunity for us to shape our role, to shape our image. So, and I think this new generation is getting it, and it's good to see.
That's a good point. So you're mainly in a a teaching role now, but I'm interested to hear what has been some of your most helpful continuing education that you've received rather than taught.
Oh man. So I the benefit of living in Chicago and the benefit of being in a university, we get like all-star people coming to talk. My first year here, we had Severin talk to us. I got to meet her over lunch with our fellows in the Orthopedic Manual Fellowship, and our other co-residents got to meet her. Who else came here? Irene Davis from Harvard, like a leading researcher. Yeah, she's awesome. Awesome woman too. She's so great. Her talk's so great too, and it changed my perspective on like running, and well, I'm not a big runner, especially anymore. I used to run for sports and stuff, but
with trash bags on, right? Did you do that with wrestling?
No, I lucked out. I was an underweight heavyweight, so I have to cut a lot of weight. So I could eat kind of ad lib throughout the season, which nice. At least for my last year. So her talk was great. We've had Cleland come. We've had all kinds of great people, and then all the great individuals. They brought the Entropy PT that's run by Sandy Hilton and Sarah Haig. So I mean, being in Chicago, I've been kind of spoiled, but it comes to me. I don't really have to go anywhere. So.
That's awesome. Who is someone in our field that we should know more about?
Oh man. Well, I think a lot of people know Larry Cahalan because he's published a good bit of stuff in PT research. He's been big on respiratory muscle training as well as sternal precautions. He wrote that great paper, I think it was PTJ he published it in. About like a systematic review and appraisal of the evidence behind sternal precautions. Big surprise, not a lot of evidence. So that was a great paper, and he's still very active in the APTA and at CSM. He does his annual research review. The two people I would really wish people were more aware of are our two probably most published researchers, and this may come off as bias, but Ross Arena and Shane Phillips. Ross Arena is our department head at UIC. This guy, I mean, I don't know how he does it. I literally don't know how he does it, because he's a department head here for a PT department. He's currently the interim head for kinesiology. He's a board member for the European Society of Prevention for Preventative Cardiovascular Medicine. So like international, like huge deal. He's a fellow of the AHA, and he's been published like and every other organization, ACSM, AACVPR, you go down the list.
Wow.
And he's been published like 400 sometimes. It's incredible. He publishes like 40 papers a year. So when people talk about like our most prestigious researchers, like Ross Arena is it. He's a PT. He's an excellent researcher, and now he's moving more into prevention. But he's written, he co-writes the scientific statements on exercise testing. It's a PT. So he's gained the respect of a cardiology organization like he has, the AHA, as a PT is huge. To publish where he's published is huge. He's done some awesome stuff. He's really, I think, a person to kind of emulate, as a researcher going between fields. Shane Phillips, who's my mentor here at UIC, similar thing. He's a PT. His PhD is in physiology, which gives you an understanding or appreciation for his broad understanding of human body systems. He's also a fellow of the AHA, and he's been published, several hundred times as well. He's more into vascular biology and basic science. I mean, in terms of grant funding, which is something that PT researchers are doing better at, obtaining funds to produce really high level science. But he's crushing it. I mean, and this is from people who aren't just PTs looking at his work thus far, like other basic science researchers regard his ability to procure grants and produce good science, basic science, in addition to clinically oriented exercise training studies. So he's got a broad scope. So, I'm very fortunate to have been mentored or be associated with these three guys because, Larry is, very well regarded, and Ross Serena is incredibly well regarded, and so is Shane, and they've all been able to do different things that I think are just great examples of different approaches to being a researcher. I mean, Shane's working on developing patents for stuff, and these are PTs, and I don't think they get a lot of press. And they don't publish as much in PT journals, but they're still PTs. We need to support these guys. Like this is again, it's part of the family. Like they're still PTs. And Shane's still pretty active in the APTA. But yeah, I mean, these guys, when you name off, you ask a student or ask a PT to name our most accomplished researchers, and you'll get a Childs, you'll get a Fritz, who are, I know, like, they're great people. But if you look at some of the accomplishments of some of these guys, you're like, why aren't these guys even in that even mentioned? It makes no sense to me. I never got it. Like, and now there's a big push in PTs for health and wellness, and most of the people I don't think who are kind of pushing that may not be aware of Ross Serena. Like he's the guy leading preventative medicine, like internationally in the PT. Like,
it's interesting too when you think of like social media's influence, and how some of these, these epic clinicians and educators, that have these absolutely amazing careers that may not be on social media. It's so fascinating for me to see how a lot of people may not know about them if they're not on social media, if they're not sharing, if they don't have some type of interactions. I know at least it's the case with a lot of the younger clinicians, and even myself. Like, I've met so many people through this podcast that I had no clue about, just because I haven't spent too much time in the literature in my field. And but then you go and look at what these people have done. You're like, oh my gosh, these are the freaking all-stars of our profession, and we need to be sharing their stuff and really just thanking them for their work. But you don't always see that, at least on the internet. You just see the loudmouths that I say that, saying that I may be one of them. People that post a lot or share a lot on social media, they can often be known by more people than some of these epic researchers and educators and clinicians. I just find that fascinating, to see kind of the gap in that.
And that's why I try to talk about these guys about anytime I get an opportunity, because I think we really, a lot of the questions people have asked sometimes, like, they've answered in a lot of their work.
It's wild. So, all right. So the last question, my favorite question. So let's say we're at CSM. You have every geriatric rehab clinician in the room. So basically all of physical therapy, because we all work with older adults, except for those PTs. But you have their attention. What would you want them to know?
What would I want them to know? Oh man, that the answer to life is 42. But no. Well, I'll leave it with a quote that I got from Meryl Cohen, who again kind of motivated a lot of this interest with me, with vitals and cardiovascular medicine, and to others at PT, that every patient, and it's very simple, every patient has a heart and at least one lung, and the functioning of those systems predicates is paramount to all movement. Like, if you can't deliver blood flow and oxygen to muscle or to working tissue, you're either not moving well or you're not moving. Just kind of conceptualize the importance of those systems, and every activity you do is, in a certain sense, a mini stress upon that system. And stress can be good because it facilitates adaptations. But if that system's not working well, that stress can be a little bit more than that system may tolerate. So it's the impetus for the importance of assessing the integrity and the capacity of that system.
Preach
Yeah.
it. I like it. Well, Dr. Rich Severin, thank you for your time this morning and just sharing your work, your wisdom, and talking about the people that have been influential in your career. I'm going to have all kinds of links in the show notes for all the people that were mentioned, the courses, and also where you can contact Rich. So, Rich, let's give him the Twitter handle one more time. What's your handle?
Yeah, well, it's actually been I've been very fortunate. I planned this out like 5 years ago when I was a student. Because everything for me is PT reviewer. So PT, like physical therapy reviewer.
Okay.
So you can find me at PT reviewer on Twitter, facebook.com/PT reviewer, and then at ptreviewer.com.
Boom. All right. Thanks, Rich. I appreciate it.
Hey, have a good one, Dustin.
Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. If you enjoy this content, I highly encourage you to go to seniorrehabproject.com where you can find more helpful episodes, lots of free resources, and to see how you can become a game changer and influence the direction of this movement. I appreciate you, and I'll talk with you soon. But in the meantime, do not forget to stay funky. The Senior Rehab Podcast is sponsored by Great Seminars and Books. If you need high-quality geriatric con ed that's worth your time and money, check out Great. Owned by the living legend Carol Lewis, Great offers courses and products created by recognized leaders in geriatrics. Learn the most effective techniques for diagnosing and treating your patients. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com/great and get $25 off by using the code SRP25. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Geros Collective, a podcast network that's redefining old and equipping healthcare clinicians to better serve our aging population. Find out more at GEROScollective.com.